afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, the second webinar of the series with the focus on the new HIPAA regulations and the impact on your business. My name is Desi Shahu, and I'll be your webinar moderator. Your presenters today will be Mike Martin and Ken Dudnick. Mike is the Practice Director for Information Governance at BTRG, and Ken is a Worldwide Information Management at IBM. Before we get started with today's webinar, I would like to go over a few administrative details. Please note that the attendees are in listen-only mode. If you wish to ask a question, please use the question box located near the bottom of the control panel. We will be addressing all the questions at the end of the webinar. If you're joining the webinar via telephone, be sure to select the telephone option and use the dial-in number, access code, and PIN to complete the connection. Today's session will be available for download on our website at www.btrgroup.com/datawebinar. Following today's webinar, you'll also receive a follow-up email with more information on accessing this material. Now I'll turn the presentation over to Mike. Take it away, Mike.
Great, thanks, Desi, and let me know if you have any audio problems with hearing me, but I'll go ahead and dive right in. So in this webinar series that we're doing, we're exploring five key trends in technology that we think will shape things over the next decade. One is big data, two is data security, three is the rising costs and volume of data, four is the convergence of structured and unstructured data, and five is new software capabilities. So in today's webinar, we're really focusing around data security and somewhat on new software capabilities and the convergence of structured and unstructured data, with a bit more of a focus on structured data. And in this webinar series, we've sort of gone with an aesthetic of very minimal slides and really just bold pictures. And so this might not be your traditional webinar, but we're really just trying to raise some awareness and talk through some key points, really more food for thought and hopefully a bit of education rather than a very deep dive with lots of busy charts and lots of information. So today we're talking about how the HIPAA regulations that are evolving and changing this year will and may affect your business. And so there's three main things that we want to cover today. Briefly on what's new with HIPAA and high tech as well. The current state of data security in the healthcare industry. We'll share some statistics around how well or poorly perhaps we're dealing with security in industry-wide. And then we'll share some thoughts on best practices, really just hopefully planting some seeds for further exploration. So, what is really, excuse me, what is driving where we are? And again, as we go through this, if you have a question, you can go ahead and type that in the chat window or press the little raise your hand icon and then go ahead and type your question in. But, what are some of the drivers and why would we even be talking about this? Well, number one, there is quite a bit of data exposure in our systems, in our applications, in our structured data sources, and even in our unstructured data sources. And as we know, data is really growing, it's exploding, and so that exposure is only increasing. And US laws are actually getting tighter around security. So today in our applications, in our critical databases, both on back office systems like ERP applications and more clinical applications where we're actually storing patient information, we have critical information there, from insurers to pharmacists, healthcare organizations, hospitals, providers, and insurers all equally have quite a bit of data exposure. And the US law is very specific about our responsibilities for protecting private data. And so there's a bit of a conflict there, and that's where we need to address some of these challenges. And according to the American Health Information Management Association, 150 people on average have access to any one person's medical records during a typical hospitalization. So that's a 150 chances that we could have a data exposure that or a privacy violation that we would be less than desirable, something we don't want to do. So the HIPAA Insurance Portability Accountability Act focuses on protecting private or confidential information for patients. Passed in 96, it really started to create national standards that the way we treat medical records and private and personal health information. Up to that point, the standards weren't really enforced. There wasn't really codified that well. There was no real set standard. Um, so, HIPAA has various aspects to it. Certainly one being protecting health insurance policies, both for employees and families and dependents, and then protecting personal information. So it's a key law, and so is high tech as well, that really focuses us on protecting patient information. Um, HIPAA really guarantees several rights to patients. One is the right to privacy, keeping their data private and protected from those that we haven't authorized to see it. The right for confidential use of that protected information, the right to access and amend your health information upon request, and also the right to request that information concerning a person's care is not released. So, this presents a situation where health providers and the health care industry is now subject to making sure that we are in alignment with these rights and that our systems are set up to enforce and comply with those rights. And who is required to do so is fairly broad, and it's actually getting a bit broader, right? So every healthcare organization is expected to have policies and procedures to comply with the HIPAA guidelines, and any person who provides care is also expected to do that and understand those um, regulations as well as comply with them. So we're talking about quite a lot of people, and as I mentioned, 150 people have access to one hospitalization. So we really have to manage this, and the scope is actually getting broader, right? So what is new this year in HIPAA? It's really a bit of broadening of the scope even further as to what the law applies to, as well as the definition. So now it's beyond just healthcare providers, healthcare plans and firms that process claims need to be involved, as well as business associates and vendors that contract with those companies. So now even more people are being held to the standard of the laws and the regulations. And it's actually, we've now broadened the definition of what health information privacy is, and the ceilings on the penalties have been raised up to $1.5 million annually. So now the cap on what the penalties that we can incur for violations has gone up significantly. Um, so there's more to deal with. We had a problem prior to this year, but now it's even more imperative. And so when these changes they were effective March 26th this year, and now we have until September 23rd to get compliant. So the really the time to act is now, and we need to make sure that our systems are secured, because we'll be potentially subject to even more issues go forward. So next, I wanted to just launch a poll question. So I'll get that ready to go, and you'll see here the poll question. I'm going to go ahead and launch that, and I just ask that you go ahead and answer. Again, this is it's a safe place to just go ahead and answer. We're actually not tracking who is checking. So just wondering where you stand with compliance efforts and looking at where you are. Are you fully compliant already, or are you in some phase of a process of becoming compliant? So I'll just give a few more seconds for anyone who didn't answer yet to go ahead and answer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll out. and then just share the results with everyone. So you can see that a third of the respondents said they're compliant. Many people are getting started, and some are well underway. So that's great. I'm glad to see no one responded that they're not started, but yet we do have more work to do to get there. So thank you very much for sharing that with everyone. And just sort of moving on now to some of these statistics here, and you can see that these were gathered by the Ponemon Institute, which is a firm that conducts a security study every year across industry, and they publish a specific study around patient privacy and data security. And you can see that there's a very high cost to data breaches, $6.8 billion worth of breaches in 2012. That's very significant. And I think the other thing that comes through in this study is that we're perhaps not doing everything we can to make sure that we're secure to prevent or deal with that $6.8 billion of cost around breaches. 3% or less of IT budgets are used in securing patient data. We had 21 million records exposed in 2012, and only 27% of respondents felt that they had sufficient resources to deal with this. 80% of the breaches caused harm to patients, and 90% and 80% are electronic, and then 40% testing. So I think there's more that we can do to make sure that we're as secure as we need to be, not just to be compliant, but also to save our enterprises money, because breaches are very costly. Also, we see that another very startling statistic in the Ponemon Institute study is that 90% of healthcare organizations say they have suffered at least one data breach in the past 2 years. That's just within the past 2 years. So, virtually almost all organizations have experienced some type of issue. And perhaps even worse than that, 45% of the report that they've had more than 5 incidences. So 90% had at least one, and almost half of them, actually half of the 90% exactly, had more than 5 incidences, which is very significant. So we see across not just healthcare, but across the technology industry, that data breaches are very much on the rise. And this just sort of confirms that we have even more of an imperative to deal with this. And only 31% of organizations feel they had confidence that they could prevent and detect any patient data loss or theft. So
Michael,
very, very low percentage. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
I just wanted to add that of those that are electronic breaches in nature, there are studies out there and information that we've gotten back from our clients that a very, very large percent, 95% or higher, of the breaches occur at the database server layer.
Mm, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So databases are very, very sensitive and can be fairly vulnerable sources. So that's a really, really key. Thanks, Ken, for that. So if we look back at some, and this is public information here, if you look back at some of the breaches of last year, you can see there's very high numbers of records. And I just want you to sort of keep these numbers in mind as we go through some of these next slides. 780,000, 315,000. The top five here are all over 100,000 records. So lots of data leakage here across the United States. So I'll launch another poll now if you can. Sorry. I have to move to the next one. There we go. I'll launch that poll. So just wanted to get a sense of, given that not everyone is compliant yet, those that aren't, will your organization be compliant by September? Go ahead and respond to that. Give you just another second or two to respond if you haven't already. I'll close it out in like 5 seconds. Okay, great. Share those results. So, 50% yes, Some folks not sure yet. So appreciate that honesty. Thank you. I think that just sort of speaks to the effort and struggle that it does take, and the amount of difficulty we sometimes have in getting secure. So let me just hide those results. Okay, so I wanted to give an actual example. This is an example from a BTRG customer, one of our clients, who was a health insurance provider, had a very, very small data breach event several years ago. This was really before we helped them. And so they had a small incident. They have about 5 million members total. So you can see with only 525 members involved, it's a really, really tiny incident. But they had to do some things because of this incident, according to HIPAA regulations. They had to create run a credit report and audit per customer. So that was $350 per customer. They had to investigate where the breach happened, make sure that they understood the scope of the breach. They estimated pretty accurately that that cost over $180,000. There was some data stolen. They assigned a cost to that. And then they had to create some new policies, conduct some advertising, and that was about $50,000. So when it all totaled up, $282,000, over $282,000 for one almost imperceptible, insignificant by number data breach, 525 folks. Now, if they had multiple breaches, or if the regulations determined that this was in fact multiple breaches, with the new HIPAA law this year regulations, that would have instantly ballooned perhaps up to as high as an additional 1.5 million. So you can see that now these uh, um, breaches are even more costly with the changes in the law. So what we ask if even 1% of members were breached, because that was less than 1%. So with 50,000 members involved, the same amount of costs just increased. You're looking at over 17.5 million for that breach. And again, add even more government fines because of the changes this year. If 10% of the breaches, we go up to $175 million. And 10% isn't a lot of data to have breached by member count. So you can see how this can be more than detrimental to an enterprise. It can really be
And then for those of you listening, and for those listening on the call, Michael, what you're showing doesn't even include, for those who are public entities, the impact on your brand, which is even greater to shareholder value.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right. And in many cases, we perhaps can't even put a dollar amount on how negative that is. So, given that we're perhaps not yet as protected as we should be, that the breaches are on the rise and almost everybody experiences some type of breach, you can see how important data security is and should be to any organization. Yet, we're not really perhaps allocating all of the effort behind data security around patient data that we should be doing. So, even beyond just being compliant with the law, we feel it's an imperative for organizations to look at how they can get more secure. So, one final poll here. Just go ahead and launch that one. So again, we just wanted to see if you've already established a budget for achieving HIPAA compliance, and I'll include security there as well. So go ahead and respond to that. I'll give a few seconds. Um, but we can see, certainly our feeling is that this is extremely important of an issue, and that's why we've classified data security as one of our top 5 trends for the next decade. Because data breaches are on the rise, and with growing data, we see that this is an even more imperative issue. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. So, actually, only 20% saying that a budget has been developed and established. So again, I think that just falls in line with the statistics we're seeing by studies across industry, that we're perhaps not necessarily fully focused on this as we should be. So thank you again. I appreciate your great responses to the polls there. Thanks for doing that. So just to kind of move on, and actually, I've sort of set up now the challenge, and let's talk about what we can do about things. So we look at best practices around database security. Again, we are focused on databases because we think that is the first place where you can get the biggest bang for your perhaps 3% that's being invested. As Ken said, these are your vulnerable assets, your databases and your applications. So we take an approach that is a comprehensive, sort of beginning to end approach. So the first thing we want to do is find and classify the data sources in your enterprise. And there are tools, and IBM has the best in the industry's tools around this. But really, what we're trying to do is bring to light with this point that you may not be aware of all the databases that are in your environment. And even if you are, we need to classify them and create a data source catalog for all of the data sources that are potential for breach. And that's what we mean by find and classify. Scan the environment, find databases, perhaps uncover small databases that were created by a department or even an individual that may not be known by the enterprise. Find those all and classify them and create a data source catalog. And we can do that in an automated fashion with the right tools. Then once we find those databases, we need to assess their security level and harden them where they have vulnerabilities. So we can do vulnerability assessments, checking the database platform. So DB2 or Oracle or SQL Server, for example, are they optimally configured? Do we have any security weaknesses or vulnerabilities in there? We can scan those and create a report that shows a report card on how secure you are per industry standards and per security best practices. And then we can plug those vulnerabilities, changing them, correcting them, and putting things in place. There's vulnerability assessments. Here we can do things like data masking, where we can mask
Correct.
non-production copies. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Um, I want to make sure we're surrounding this correctly because there is some impetus on the business side of your environments or enterprises to get involved. I mean, setting clear policies around data security and data privacy is the great start. I also believe that one should automate those policies because that's what auditing will look for when they're doing their assessment on whether you've used best efforts to do so. So in automation of those policies, you should be able to classify and report on who exactly is touching your databases, who's using it, and for what purpose. So I just want to make sure that while all of this is correct, it is an enterprise-wide challenge, and your chief security officers or whomever need to get involved as part of their defense in depth strategy in setting these clear policies so that the IT departments can not only adhere to them, but also implement them and feel comfortable that they're working according to the business need.
Yes, absolutely. Excellent point, Ken. Did you have more on that?
I think at this point, no. I'll
Okay.
leave it at that.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of echo what you just said there because it's an absolutely critical point. We see more and more that it's actually the convergence of groups in an enterprise that enable us to get where we need to go, right? It's the bringing together of your business, perhaps your records and retention uh, policies, and the group that sets those, making those actionable, and the business, business records retention, IT, and perhaps even legal as well, right? Bringing all of these groups together to enable us to create actionable retention schedules, actionable business rules that we can enforce, security. Even, from a security standpoint, really it's information governance and data management goes beyond that. Reducing data volumes is a key thing that we can do to help secure our environment. The more data we have, the more opportunity there is for a breach, or the higher our risk profile becomes. Right. So
Yes, and Michael, if I could just jump in one more time. I think in the find and classify section, if you're looking at policies and automation of those policies, as part of the find and classify, if you are trying to identify everywhere sensitive data lives so that you can have that defense in depth strategy, then I think by definition, you're also going to start to identify the users who have access to that or the roles who have access to that within your environment. And once you have that, you can move on to the third step within your environment, which is to set up the access privileges, or at least review and harden the access privileges so that you have the separation of duties that you need and the access privileges. And the benefits of that for all of you listening is not just a hardened security environment. There are some cost and business operating efficiencies benefits that you can do there. I mean, you're going to reduce your employee compliance management overhead, your database server log savings, some security audit savings, some log management savings. You're also going to create a risk profile that's much less risky to the outside world and the HIPAA community. And you're able to do access certification much more quickly. So there are benefits to doing these things, to taking those steps around the best practice approach.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Excellent point. And really, it's about maturing your view of data privacy and data security and getting to the level where you have, a common enterprise, taxonomy around what is valuable data, what's important data, what's sensitive data at an enterprise level across systems because they have tons of commonality, right? And then automation of those of the policies, maturity of your security, so that you've hardened the databases, that you are monitoring then the appropriate access with segregation of duties. Rather than having the DBAs hold all the keys to security, let's move that away from them so that we can actually monitor watch the detective, so to speak. And then having extensive audit and automation, as well as comprehensive reporting around all of this, that we've found and classified sensitive data sources and data elements that we have assessed and hardened. And we're continuing to monitor for new vulnerabilities as we upgrade applications, making sure that they stay secure, and that we're monitoring database activity. Ideally, what you want to do is have a solution that encompasses all of these things, that works across your enterprise, across platforms as well, because you may have Oracle, DB2, SQL Server, and other data sources. So it needs to be platform independent. It needs to sweep across the enterprise and enable that segregation of duties, so that we're not asking the people who might actually be causing vulnerabilities to also be the holders of the security key. And just by segregation, then we sort of have at least two different camps. And it's a, security is really about layers, right? We're putting layers in place, and the stronger each layer is, and the more of them we have, the more secure we are. Okay, so I think that's we're running pretty close on time. So I just wanted to sort of recap here and remind everyone of key takeaways that we hope you got from today's webinar. Certainly, and again, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat because we'll leave a few minutes for those at the end. But healthcare data breaches and data breaches in general are on the rise, right? There are internal risks that we have of a data breach or leakage happening. Individuals, enterprises, and at this point, countries are actually specifically targeting our systems for extracting and stealing our data. So this is definitely on the rise, and data is on the rise. So there's more risk just inherently in the amount of data we're producing and the efforts to get it. Certainly, we've seen significant financial damage, as well as, like Ken pointed out, reputational damage that can be really, really difficult to recover from. It's also much more difficult to deal with security after a breach than it is before, right? Because after a breach, everything gets a lot more difficult. Systems get locked down. People get more concerned. And so to implement a security solution, we see it actually takes much longer after the breach. Um, the new HIPAA laws, we have an increase on the ceiling around the penalty. So now we're looking at potentially, $1.5 million added onto the cost that we have already, and we need to get compliant by September 23rd this year. So really now is the time to act. And we covered some best practices, an enterprise approach, a platform independent approach, and a comprehensive approach from finding, assessing, to securing, and then continuously monitoring where we are with security.
Mike,
Yeah.
I know you want to open it up to questions, but I wanted to cover real quick. We've been focusing mostly on production databases here. I'd like to quickly cover the test environment as well. Some of you may be copying production data down to your testing environment. You may have exceptions within your own infrastructure, but I think you know that the new laws go across not only your organization, but any of your business partners or entities that you work with. And when you look at the identify and assess and find and classify areas of production, you also have to look at doing the same thing in test. Most of you, or many of our customers in healthcare, have a very long data provisioning process, integration testing across the multitude of players in the healthcare continuum creates a data provisioning nightmare. And without having these kind of best practices implemented in production, then all you're doing is perpetuating them down to test, and you're still exposed. So there are some ways of expanding the best practices approaches to also include your test data management environment. So we can talk about that at some other time.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point. And like I said, masking data in non-production environments and provisioning environments only with the data that's absolutely necessary for that purpose of environment is a really key strategy and best practice for us to protect those non-production environments, because they do tend to proliferate. So that's a great point. Thanks, Ken. You've made excellent points all the way through this, so I really appreciate your participation. So as we wrap up, again, if there are any questions, certainly type them in the chat window, or you can feel free to reach out to us independently. I just wanted to highlight that this is the second in the webinar series. We have several more coming up. You can see the dates there, centered around these 5 trends that we're focused on this year, which is, big data, data security, rising costs and volume of data, convergence of structured and unstructured data, and the new software capabilities that are really coming out. IBM is releasing a lot of things, and big data is driving a lot of innovation in the industry. So we're covering some of those as well. So the very next webinar is on the 15th. It's covering the top 10 reasons your data is not actually as protected as you might think it is. Again, we say, like we mentioned today, the databases are your most sensitive and vulnerable assets, and we need to make sure they're locked down. So we'll actually go into a little bit more depth on how you lock down your databases and what you can do to secure your data, both in production and non-production environments. So again, I really encourage you to join that webinar if you can. You can certainly send us any questions at all at infogov@btrgroup.com, or call us at that number. And really hope that if you're not already, you please follow me on Twitter at BTRG_Mike Martin. I post many good articles and post a lot of good things to check out and learn around these trends and technologies, as well as follow BTRG IG, which is our information governance practice, as BTRG IG. So I hope that we can connect online as well. So I don't see any questions at this time. Thanks again for your participation today. Really hope you found some value. And again, don't hesitate to contact us with any questions, and hope to see you on another webinar. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you very much.